My husband and his father lived off me for 4 years without working, but when his father pushed me down the stairs and my husband did nothing, I sued them, evicted them, and left them penniless. I'm 32 years old. I work as a project manager at a tech company. And I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago literally changed my entire life. And when I say entire, I mean entire. I guess I should start by explaining how I got to this point. Because honestly, when I look back, there are so many red flags that I just ignored. You know, those things you see but decide aren't that serious. That things are going to get better. That love is enough. Spoiler alert. Love isn't enough when you're living with two parasites who are bleeding you dry financially and emotionally. I met Andrew like 6 years ago, maybe almost 7, at a work conference. He was charming, funny, we had a lot in common. And honestly, I thought I had found my person. You know what I mean? We got married after 2 years of dating. And things were good at first. Normal. Like any new marriage. He worked in sales. I had my job in tech. We shared expenses, went out on weekends, planned trips. It was what a marriage is supposed to be, or at least that's what I thought. But then his father, Raymond, lost his job. He was like 58 years old at the time, I think. And he basically decided he didn't want to work anymore. It's not that he couldn't find work. It's that he simply said he was tired and deserved to retire early. And Andrew, being the devoted son he is, said we should help him. That it was temporary. That it would only be a few months until Raymond got back on his feet. Those months turned into 4 years. 4 complete years in which I, Victoria, was the only person in that house bringing in money. And when I say I paid for everything, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. I paid the rent, which was like $2,200 a month, all the utilities, internet, cable, cell phones for all 3 of us, food, cleaning supplies, even the toilet paper. Raymond moved in with us after losing his apartment because, obviously, without a job he couldn't pay for anything, and Andrew quit his job. Like a year after his father moved in, he said he was stressed, that he needed a break, that he was going to find something better. That break never ended. I basically became the sole provider for 2 fully capable adult men who simply decided not to work. The worst part wasn't just the money, though that was already bad enough. It was the attitude. Raymond acted like I owed him something, like it was my obligation to support him. He complained about the food I bought, said he wanted specific brands. Why wasn't I buying better meat? Why wasn't there more variety? Andrew never defended me, never told his father he was being ridiculous. He just shrugged and told me not to make drama, that his father was older and deserved respect. Respect? Respect? I was working 10 hours a day, sometimes more, to keep that household afloat, while the 2 of them sat around watching TV and playing video games. Raymond didn't even help with household chores. He left his dirty dishes in the living room, his clothes scattered everywhere, and expected me to pick it all up when I got home from work. And Andrew had adopted exactly the same habits as his father. Things started getting really tense like 6 months ago. I was tired, physically and emotionally exhausted, and I started saying no to certain things. Raymond wanted me to buy him a new TV for his room, one of those 65-inch ones, and I told him no, that we didn't have money for that. He got furious, started yelling at me that I was selfish, that I didn't appreciate everything he had done for Andrew, as if that had anything to do with me. Andrew, of course, took his father's side, told me it wouldn't cost that much, that we could do monthly payments, but I was already maxed out on my credit cards trying to keep everything running. We ended up fighting. And I gave in, because I was too tired to keep arguing. I bought the damn TV. But the straw that broke the camel's back happened 3 months ago. Raymond came to me one afternoon. I had just gotten home from work, hadn't even taken off my shoes, and he told me he needed $3,000 to buy a car. Just like that. Out of nowhere. As if I had $3,000 extra lying around. I asked him why he needed a car if he didn't even work, if he had nowhere to go, and he told me that wasn't my problem, that I was the daughter-in-law and had an obligation to take care of him. I told him no, that I definitely didn't have $3,000 to give him, that I was barely covering the month's expenses. He turned red, literally red with rage, and started yelling at me, saying I was a bad wife, that I was being cruel to an elderly man, that Andrew should divorce me. I kept my calm, or at least tried to, and told him the answer was no, that if he wanted a car, he'd have to get a job like any other adult. What happened next? I still have trouble processing. Honestly. Raymond came toward me. I was standing near the stairs, and he pushed me. It wasn't a little push. No. It was a hard, violent push with both my hands. I completely lost my balance and fell down the stairs. There weren't many steps, like 5 or 6, but it was enough for me to get hurt badly. I scraped my hands trying to grab onto something, hit my hip against the railing, and ended up on the hallway floor with a twisted ankle and horrible pain in my back. I lay there for a moment, in total shock, unable to believe what had just happened. I could hear Raymond upstairs yelling that it was my fault for being so stubborn, that I'd asked for it. And Andrew? Andrew came out of his room, saw me lying on the floor, clearly injured. And you know what he did? Nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. He asked me if I was okay. But when I told him his father had pushed me, that he had physically attacked me, Andrew said I had probably provoked him, that his father wouldn't do something like that without reason. And he said it was probably an accident, that I was exaggerating. He didn't help me get up, didn't call an ambulance, didn't confront his father. He just stood there like an idiot while I dragged myself to the bathroom to check my injuries. That was the moment. You know, that moment when something clicks in your brain and you realize you can't go on like this anymore, that if you don't save yourself, no one else will. It took me like an hour to manage to get up properly and limp up the stairs. I went into my room, locked the door, and started packing. I threw clothes into a suitcase, grabbed my important documents, my laptop, some personal things I valued. Andrew knocked on the door at some point asking what I was doing, and I just told him I was leaving, that I couldn't keep living like this. He started with the typical speech that I was being dramatic, that families fight but they forgive, that his father was sorry even though he hadn't even come to apologize. I told him to open his eyes, that his father had attacked me, that he had physically hurt me, and that he had chosen his father's side over mine. Andrew kept insisting that I was misinterpreting everything, that we needed to talk calmly, but I had already made my decision. I left that house with my suitcase and backpack, limping and in pain all over my body, and went to a motel. Not a nice hotel, a motel, one of those cheap ones on the highway where people don't ask questions. I checked in for a week and threw myself on the bed to cry. I cried for hours, not just from the physical pain but from everything, from the 4 years I had wasted, from the man Andrew had become, from having allowed myself to get to that point. But after crying, I felt something different. I felt rage, a deep and justified rage. And that rage gave me clarity. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to let these 2 men destroy me. I was going to fight. The next morning, I called Natasha, a lawyer I knew from college. We had kept in touch over the years. We weren't super close, but we got along well, and I knew she specialized in family law and domestic abuse cases. I told her everything, from the beginning, without omitting details. I explained the 4 years of financial exploitation, Raymond's verbal threats, the push down the stairs, Andrew's total lack of support. Natasha listened to everything without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Victoria, you have a solid case, both for a civil lawsuit and to get those parasites out of your property legally." Wait, my property? Yes. Turns out the house was in my name. We had bought it 2 years after getting married, but since Andrew didn't have good credit at the time, we put everything in my name with the idea that we would eventually add him as a co-owner. That never happened because, well, he stopped working after that and it didn't make sense anymore. Natasha explained that I had the legal right to evict them, that the house was mine, and they were technically tenants without a contract. She also told me we could sue Raymond, too, for assault and potentially recover some of the money I had spent supporting them, though that would be more complicated. The first thing I did was go to the hospital to document my injuries. They took x-rays of my ankle, checked my back, and documented all the bruises and scrapes. The doctor asked me how it happened, and when I told him the truth, he suggested I file a police report. I did. I went to the police station, filed a formal complaint against Raymond for assault, and gave them all the information about the incident. I don't know if anything will come of it criminally, but at least it was on record. The next few days were chaos with paperwork and planning. Natasha helped me gather evidence of all the money I had spent supporting them. I printed bank statements from the last 4 years, grocery receipts, utility bills, everything I could to prove I was the only one paying. I also saved text messages where Raymond demanded money from me and where Andrew told me I was being selfish for not giving his father what he asked for. It was depressing to see it all together. All those transactions, all those years reduced to a pile of papers that clearly showed how they had used me. Meanwhile, I found a small apartment for myself. It wasn't anything fancy, a one-bedroom place in a more affordable area, but it was mine. No one else would live there. No one else was going to take advantage of me. I signed the lease and started moving my things little by little, the things I had left in the house. I went when I knew Andrew and Raymond weren't there, usually early in the morning when they were still sleeping, and took out boxes with my belongings. It was weird. Entering that house that was technically mine, but no longer felt like my home, but rather like a prison I had escaped from. After 2 weeks of preparation, Natasha was ready to proceed. I met with her in her office, signed all the necessary documents, and she explained exactly what was going to happen. First, we were going to serve them legal eviction papers, giving them 30 days to vacate the property. Simultaneously, we were going to file a civil lawsuit against Raymond for the assault and for the money I had spent supporting him. Andrew wasn't included in the civil suit because technically he was my husband, and shared expenses are more legally complicated, but the eviction applied to both. Natasha warned me they probably weren't going to take it well, that Raymond especially could get aggressive, and that I should keep my distance and let the legal process run its course. The day they were served the papers, I was at my new apartment. Natasha had hired a professional process server to go to the house and deliver the documents formally. I waited for his call, nervous like never before in my life. When my phone finally rang, the server told me he had delivered the papers to Raymond personally. Apparently, Raymond had opened the door, seen the documents, read them quickly, and then started yelling that this was a conspiracy, that I couldn't do this to them, that he was going to sue me. The server simply confirmed the documents had been delivered and left. Mission accomplished. Minutes later, the messages from Andrew started. Dozens of messages asking what was going on, telling me this was crazy. How could I do this to my own husband? That his father was devastated. I responded once telling him to read the documents carefully, that everything was explained there, and that any further communication should be through my lawyer. Then I blocked him. I also blocked Raymond, who had sent me much more aggressive messages calling me everything, threatening to destroy my reputation, saying I was going to regret it. I forwarded those threats to Natasha too, to document them. The 30 days of the eviction were the longest of my life. Every day I expected something to happen, for them to come looking for me, to cause problems, but nothing happened. Apparently they stayed in the house, waiting for me to change my mind, thinking it was an empty threat. Andrew tried to contact me through mutual acquaintances, leaving messages saying we needed to talk, that we could work this out, that he was willing to get a job if that's what I wanted. But it was too late for that. Years too late. Respect, love, trust, all of that had been broken long before Raymond pushed me down the stairs. That incident was just the final excuse. I needed to do what I should have done a long time ago. When the 30-day period ended and they were still in the house, Natasha proceeded with the next step, which was getting a court order to force the eviction. The judge reviewed all the documents, saw the house was in my name, that I had given proper notice, and signed the order. 2 days later, a sheriff went to the house with the court order to physically remove them if necessary. I didn't go, but Natasha was there to supervise that everything was done correctly. She told me later that Raymond had torn up the original eviction papers in front of the sheriff, yelling that those documents meant nothing, that he wasn't going anywhere. The sheriff, very calmly according to Natasha, explained that he could leave on his own or he could be escorted out in handcuffs. His choice. Raymond chose to leave on his own, but not without first yelling and making a scene. Andrew was quieter, apparently, just packing things in boxes with a defeated look. At one point, according to Natasha, Andrew asked her if he could talk to me, if I was willing to reconsider, especially about the lawsuit against his father. Natasha told him no, that I had been very clear about my intentions. Andrew then said something that got to me when Natasha told me. He said, "I thought family was the most important thing to her. I thought she loved us." And Natasha, bless her, responded with something perfect. She told him, "Family is important. That's why she's doing this, because you stopped treating her like family a long time. Years ago." I wish Andrew had understood that years earlier. I watched them leave my house, loading their things into a moving truck that Raymond had apparently rented. I don't know where they went. Honestly, I don't care. I think they moved in with some relative of Raymond's, a sister or something. What I know is that as soon as they left, Natasha called me to confirm the property was empty and I could return whenever I wanted. But I didn't want to return. Not yet. Instead, I hired a locksmith to change all the locks on the house. I also installed a security system with cameras in case Raymond tried to come back or do something stupid. I needed to feel safe before even considering setting foot in that house again. Several weeks passed before I finally went in again. It was strange. Very strange. The house felt different. Emptier, obviously, but also cleaner in a sense. And they had left trash and dirt everywhere. So I hired a deep cleaning service. I wanted to erase any trace of them, any memory, 2 of those years. While the cleaners worked, I sat in the yard thinking about everything that had happened, how I had gotten to that point. Part of me felt guilty. You know, that voice in your head that tells you maybe you were too harsh, that maybe you could have handled things differently. But then I remembered the sleepless nights worrying about money, the insults, the push, the total lack of empathy, and the guilt faded away. I started focusing on rebuilding my life, on finding myself again. I had lost so much of my identity in those 4 years. I had stopped doing things I liked because I was always working or too tired. So I signed up for a yoga class, started reading again, began going out with friends I had neglected. My boss at work had noticed I was more upbeat, more present, and offered me a new project that came with a considerable raise. I accepted without hesitation. Things were starting to fall into place, slowly but surely. The civil lawsuit against Raymond continued of course, over the following months. It was a long and frustrating process with a lot of legal back and forth. Raymond hired a lawyer who tried to argue that he didn't owe me anything, that living with us was a family arrangement and not a financial contract. But Natasha presented all the evidence we had compiled: the bank statements, the text messages demanding money, the medical report of my injuries, the police report. The judge heard both sides, reviewed all the documents, and finally ruled in my favor. He ordered Raymond to pay me $45,000, a fraction of what I had actually spent over 4 years, but something is something. He also ordered him to pay legal costs. I don't know how he's going to get that money considering he doesn't work. Honestly, I don't think I'll ever see a cent. But winning the case was enough for me. It was validation. It was justice. It was the universe telling me I was right, that what they had done to me was wrong. Andrew tried to contact me one more time after the ruling came out. He sent me a long email, one of those that probably took him hours to write, explaining his side of the story. He said he had been a bad husband, that he had let himself be manipulated by his father, that if he could turn back time, he would do things differently. He said he still loved me, that he wanted us to try again, that he was willing to go to therapy, to get a job, to do whatever was necessary. I read it all. I'm not going to lie. And for one very brief moment, I considered responding. But then I thought about everything. About the years of neglect. About how he had let me fall down the stairs without doing anything. About how he had chosen his abusive father over me again and again. And I realized his words came too late, that it didn't matter if they were sincere or not, because I had already moved on. I didn't respond. I simply deleted the email and continued with my life. I decided to sell the house. At first I thought about staying, about really making it my home, but there were too many bad memories, too many walls that had witnessed my suffering. I put it on the market and it sold quickly, in less than 2 months. With the money from the sale, I paid off my debts, invested part of it, and used the rest to move to a larger apartment in an area I had always liked. This place is completely mine, decorated to my taste, without compromises, without having to consider anyone else's opinions. I hung paintings bought new furniture, painted the walls colors I always wanted to use, but Andrew said were ugly. It's my space, my sanctuary. I also started therapy, because even though I was moving forward, I knew I had to process everything that had happened in a healthy way. My therapist has helped me tremendously to understand why I tolerated that situation for so long, to recognize behavior patterns, to establish healthy boundaries. She's taught me that taking care of myself isn't selfishness, that saying no is valid and necessary, that I deserve respect and reciprocity in all my relationships. These are things that sound obvious when you say them out loud, but aren't so obvious when you're living in the middle of chaos. A couple of weeks ago, I ran into a friend of Andrew's at the supermarket. It was awkward at first, because I didn't know if she knew what had happened. Turns out she did know, and she told me that Andrew and Raymond are living together in a small apartment, that they both finally got part-time jobs because they had no other choice. She also told me Andrew asks about me from time to time, that apparently he told her he made the worst mistake of his life. I'm not going to lie. Hearing that made me feel something. I don't know exactly what, maybe a mix of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness for what could have been if Andrew had been different, if he had chosen to be my partner instead of being the submissive son of an abuser. Satisfaction because he finally had to face the consequences of his actions, because he can't live at my expense anymore. But the most important thing is that I'm okay now. Really okay. It's not that everything is perfect, or that I don't have difficult days, but I'm at peace. I have my space, my job, my friends, my freedom. I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet because I'm focused on myself, but it's nice to feel that I can if I want to, that my life belongs to me. Sometimes I think about everything I went through, and it seems surreal, like it happened to someone else. But I also feel proud. Genuinely proud of myself for getting out, for fighting, for not staying a victim. Last week, I went for a walk on the beach, something I hadn't done in years because I was always too busy or too tired. I sat in the sand watching the sunset, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like pure happiness. There was no one demanding money from me, no one making me feel guilty, no one expecting me to sacrifice my well-being for theirs. Just me, the ocean, and the certainty that I did the right thing. I guess that's enough for now. And honestly, it's more than I had for 4 years. My life is finally mine again, and I'm not going to let anyone take it from me ever again.